right? But the real recession, when they finally identify it, I think it's going to be really nasty. I think it's going to be close to depressionary. Can talk about 30 trillion and whatever the numbers are. But again, if we look at the numbers in general, they continue to grow up every year. Okay. If we lived like Congress or the government lived, we'd be either in bankruptcy court or jail. Okay. And until somebody steps up, and I thought that President Trump was going to step up in his second term. I was really pissed off in his first term when he didn't stop to close the government down. Okay. I thought he should have. And I think that the only way we can get this organized is to say enough, because there has to be a real budget. Do you realize that in the year 2023, 63% of the jobs were either government or special interest jobs?
Yeah.
They weren't real jobs, but yet, so the employment looks good. So we have a problem that they're not going to stop spending, and we need to get in an administration, okay, that's going to say enough. Let's stop giving our money away. Let's stop funding Ukraine. Why are we funding Ukraine? It's a ridiculous war. But of course, if you look behind the scenes, look at all the defense companies that are making money. Look at all the politicians that are getting paid off through the lobbyists. So again, it's a whole scam that we have to unfortunately deal with until the American people step up. But when you vote in a guy like who's in the office now, and again, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm a libertarian. I'm down in the middle. But the guy they voted in now with this whole administration, they want to give everything away just by opening the borders. How many tax dollars does each American have to pay to keep those borders open?
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like there's really no end in sight. They're going to keep kicking the can down the road. It doesn't seem like they're going to be able to balance the budget or whatnot. But if they did, and they pulled this $3 trillion of deficit spending, and they actually did pull the reins in here, and there wasn't 63% of all jobs being new going to the government, et cetera, what would happen to the markets and the economy in that situation? I mean, wouldn't we go through a transition period?
Well, listen, I think if you got down into reality, the markets would have to take a massive bath first, but I think they would come back stronger. If you look at it again, if we actually had some fiscal responsibility by our leaders, and that's both sides of the aisle, okay? If we had some fiscal responsibility by our leaders, then we would have a much stronger country, okay? We have weakened ourselves. Look at how much money that we spend for illegal immigration. I mean, in California, they budget about 23 or 24% just to straight out of the budget for illegal aliens. But what about all the other costs that the taxpayers have to pay for those illegals, which is including healthcare? And of course, now in New York, they want to give $1,500 a month as a stipend. In Maryland, they want to give them free healthcare. I mean, where does that money come from? Nobody realizes that the government makes no money. They make debt. The American taxpayer pays the debt and pays for all that. Those freebies that they're giving out are not free. We're paying for them. And all they're really doing is destroying a nation and destroying the people in it and destroying really the middle class, which is the key class of any great economy, because the middle class are the workers and the spenders. Okay. The rich, they spend all the time. That doesn't matter to them. Okay. The poor, they get their benefits. They don't do anything. It's the middle class that they're destroying, which is really the big turbulence that's going to be in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. So budget deficits are currently 7% of GDP. Going back 60, 70 years, deficits rise about 4% in a recession, except for the past 3. Deficits have risen on average about 9%. If we have a recession and deficits rise from, say, the current 7% to maybe about 12%, and it stays there for 5 years, it's been calculated that about 50% of all tax revenues will now go towards just interest expense. Todd, is the Fed going to have to resort to just printing trillions to meet all the budget and other needs caused by the recession? How is this going to work? Can you speak into this?
Well, I can tell you that if they don't stop with the ridiculous spending, and if they don't start to control things, yes, the Fed will continue to produce new money. Again, we have a real problem. This links back to the Fed, the banking system. I mean, you know, in 2008, they had a chance to let the banks go bust, which they should have. If you want to bail out somebody, you should have bailed out the taxpayer, the depositors, okay, not force the taxpayers to keep and fund these banks. You know, we keep creating and printing new money now anyways. You know, when a bank can lend out 10 to 1 okay, on a deposit, right? So they taking $1, they can lend out 10. They're getting paid off. They're printing and creating new money through the banking system. Well, now there's a little hitch. If you borrow from the Fed, they go to the emergency lending window, they borrow money from the Federal Reserve. That becomes a liability. But on their books, they can now turn that into an asset. So they can take a liability, turn it into an asset, and lend it out 10 times. Okay. So how much money are the banks actually making? In the meantime, they're flooding the system with capital because of all the lending that they're putting out there. So not only is the Fed printing the money, but the banks are printing the money. And it makes your dollar worthless, which is, of course, if you look in the Griffin and the Creature from Jekyll Island, a lot of these things that are happening today were laid out 30 years ago when he first wrote the book.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the consumer. Let's talk about the consumer. Since the pandemic, wage growth has not kept pace with inflation. Evidence of this is seen in the rapidly declining savings rate, rapidly increasing credit card and personal loan levels, credit card delinquencies, and the banks increasingly unwilling to make consumer loans. Where's the breaking point for the consumer?
I don't know. It's hard to imagine that you go out to a restaurant and the restaurant is packed. It's hard to imagine that in Las Vegas it's booming because I don't know where they're getting the money from. Okay. It is obviously debt money. Again, you look at what's going on. It makes no logical sense when you hear what the numbers are and you hear what inflation is because they're not correct. Again, but interest rates, I think the key is that as the interest rate market climbs higher, and I think it's going higher. Okay, I don't think they can do anything about it, and they continue to create more debt. I think that we're only, again, timing it, hard to say when, but it's close. But close is a relative term. Again, we're in a very vulnerable, weak situation right now. But again, in the election year, in what's going on, and the whole theory behind everybody, Martin Niemöller wrote a poem about, first they came for this. Nobody cares until it affects them directly. And that's the problem, because when it finally affects you directly, it's already too late.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we're in this seemingly melt up. GDP was up over 5%. Inflation is obviously ticking higher. The numbers aren't even correct. Debt's exploding. I mean, everything, the markets are going high. Everything's just, everything's melting up. But it's got to hit the wall at some point, right? So there's going to be a crash. We don't know when, but it's going to drop. Is this going to be a severe, deep recession? Is this going to be a long, protracted recession? What do you see when it finally does roll over?
Well, I think first I already thought we were in a recession. That's number one, partially, right? But the real recession, when they finally identify it, I think it's going to be really nasty. I think it's going to be close to depressionary. We're in a very key spot here as to whether we go into stagflation, which, if you remember the Carter era, it wasn't a good era, okay, for the average person. Again, and I think that this is what we're watching. And again, trying to time it is hard, right? It's like, I'm not going to get in the way of it, but you can start to see the problems. And again, I said we've been in a recession for a year now already, because if you look at the majority, if you look at the amount of homeless, if you look at what's going on in San Francisco, you look at what's going on, in Chicago, okay, where I'm originally from. It's not good, but yet we continue to ignore the problems because, again, it goes back to the people in power, until it affects them directly, don't care. And so I think that we go into a potential depression when it's all said and done, because, again, we're ignoring and not handling too many of the problems that we have today, versus, again, we could handle them. If we would fix them as they came, I don't think it would be a problem. But we don't. As you have mentioned, we keep building more debt, printing more money, more special interest programs, more of this, more, it's hard to overcome that once you get to that point.
So, I just want to pull on the string of the depression that you're talking about. Is this a, 15-year situation like it was leading up to, World War II? Is it a more of a GDP unemployment impact? Like, what are you seeing?
I think it's an employment impact for sure. I think we're already seeing it. Nobody talks about the layoffs at Amazon, the layoffs at UPS, the layoffs at FedEx, the layoffs here. I mean, there's layoffs everywhere. Okay. Nobody talks about when you go into a store you can't get any help because there's nobody there. So how good are jobs? It's kind of a phony picture when they tell you how good the jobs number are because of what they show and how they show they're created. And they're not using actually the real numbers, right? They're using the U3, which is a 3-month basis versus the U6, or the quarterly, which is a much better identification of how jobs really are. There's a lot of people that aren't working right now, which is again goes back to why I think you're seeing new construction contractors making deals. They never made deals before on new house, new construction. They're making deals now because they don't want to get stuck with inventory. I think this last, things happen so much faster. It's hard to say because when I first started trading, the news actually meant something, right? Because you stood like trading places, you stood in front of the TV set because the money supply came out on Thursdays at 3:00. The jobs number was reported. Nobody knew about it. Now, with all the technology, everybody knows about it normally beforehand. You don't think Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan don't have the numbers ahead of time? And not because they're getting them illegally, but if you know how to do the calculations and you understand and you track everything, then you can know what the job number is going to be when it comes out on Friday, March 8th. So again, the technology and the speed of information takes away the surprise of the market, which is why if you've watched the option markets for the last 40 years, implied volatility used to be an average of in the 30s. Now implied volatility is an average in the 12s. Why? Because there's so much information that there isn't that many shocks or surprises anymore. So how long it lasts, it'll be a long time. But again, duration is hard to say because of the way that we can recover and think how much faster things can happen today.
So when you're talking about unemployment at this level, we're talking millions of people out of work. Do you see robotics and AI extending that? And then how are they going to make ends meet? Are we going to see stimmy checks monthly coming to the folks who are unemployed, maybe for a prolonged period of time?
I would think so. I'm not a big fan of the way that we're doing things with the robotics and AI. Again, not that I'm against it, but I'm against what it does to people. Okay, because we still need a working society that has a reason to go to work. And right now, look at the amount of service jobs we have versus actual production jobs. Look at the amount of jobs that you can still make a real good living, like as a manufacturer or a machine toolist. Again, I'm not saying we should go back to 1920, but certainly I think we're getting a little bit too far ahead of our skis, but let alone we haven't fixed our infrastructure. Do you realize that if we would go to the time to fix the infrastructure, all these people that I'm talking about that are affected by AI and technology could go to work now, and it would take 30 years to really rebuild this country the way it's supposed to be? Because in my life, every president has promised to fix the infrastructure. So far, I have seen zero fix it, okay? And of course, we've got a power grid that is in horrible shape, that can be hacked easily, which can be fixed. And we've got the people and the technology to fix it now and let these people work, make a living, fix the country, and secure our stuff versus letting it off all the garbage.
Yeah. There's just so much there. I want to take us over to banking. No, I'm serious. There's so much. I'm going to have you back on here. Let's talk about real estate and banking. Buffett, to bring him up for a second time, he recently sold 100% of his holdings in D.R. Horton, the largest U.S. home builder by volume. He did so after only holding it for 2 quarters. Todd, what's that telling you?
Well, it's telling you kind of what I'm saying now. I mean, I think that the housing market is the bubble is popping. I think it's popping now. Okay. Now, again, it may not pop tomorrow. Again, I don't want anybody to say, well, I better go out and run and sell everything right now. But the high interest rates was the first trigger, right? Because people are trading money. They weren't trading a house. They weren't buying a new house. They were trading the money. How much was my payment going to be? Well, now interest rates are higher. So anybody who's trying to sell their house, the value has dropped because it's not so easy to sell. You have builders that are building brand new construction in hot areas that are now making deals. Okay. They're telling you that there's a problem. Warren Buffett selling his holdings. He's saying, look, there's a problem here. And again, it may not happen today, and you can ignore it all you want. But like I'm going through right now, I'm trying to sell a house right now, okay, because I already bought the new house. I'm trying to sell it. Now, again, it's only been up a couple of days. I've had 4 or 5 people come through it. But if I don't sell it in a week or two, I'll be starting to get a little bit nervous, okay? And I think that you're at the key time here where the markets are in trouble. We go back because we had a little bit of a taste of this about 3 years ago, and then it kind of went away. But now I think it's coming back, and I think this time when it comes back, I think that the 10-year notes are going to 6%, which is a key benchmark for interest rates for loans. No longer LIBOR, and I think that puts mortgages at 8, 9, or 10%. So again, if they get there, what's going to happen? And I don't see anything that's going to change that. And as I said, Buffett is selling. The people, real estate is making deals, and a lot of areas that were hotter are no longer hot. So to me, the real estate market's in for a beat down once again.
Yeah, well, home sales are already down to levels not seen since the 1980s. So if mortgage rates go up to 8, 9, 10%, where does it go from there? All right. Commercial real estate. The Blackstone Group recently defaulted on a New York City office loan, and it's now for sale at about a 50% discount. It was a $308 million mortgage, and now the debt, which is packed into commercial mortgage-backed securities, is being marked down to roughly $150 million. The building appraised in April of 23 at $175 million. So it's down an astonishing 71% from the appraisal that happened in 2014, less than 10 years ago. That one came in at $605 million. So this is not an isolated case, though. Todd, office and multifamily buildings seem to be going delinquent or into forced sale, like almost daily. I'm seeing it. So will there be a cascading effect into the residential real estate market from this CRE crisis? And more importantly, what can we expect the impact to be on the banks that are holding these loans?
Well, I think the banks have actually probably written down a lot of this. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. I think we all knew this was coming, which is why you're not seeing the major meltdown. I think that the assets were overvalued to begin with, which was part of the scam and the game that was played. I don't think that it will have as dramatic effect as people might think, because again, we've already knew about this. This was something that could have been accounted for and priced in going forward. As far as the residential markets, I mean, the residential markets will be hurt because of higher interest rates, but I don't think they'll be hurt because of this, because actually one of the things that helped propel the residential markets were the collapse of commercial real estate, people leaving the workforce, leaving the city to go out to their home and actually buy homes even farther away from the city they worked in, because they didn't have to go to the office either as often or at all. So I think that allowed and built up a little bit more of the commercial home office type space and things like that. So I think that the whole space is in trouble, but I do believe the commercial side has been pretty much fairly priced in. Now, again, there'll probably be some ramifications when there's the first real defaults that we are public, like, oh my God, but I don't think that overall there's any real surprise coming here. So this is not something that the markets are not already anticipating.
So, but from a delinquency, default, write-down standpoint, resale at 30% of the original values, we're talking tax receipt hit to city and state governments, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I think that they'll see some issues. But again, I think a lot of this has been, kind of accounted for through depreciation, through other things when they do. So they've already written down a lot, especially a company like Blackstone and some of those. They already figured some of this because they were already buying the good real estate after they knew they had the bad real estate in their pocket already, right? So it'll come off their balance sheet. Listen, it's not going to be good, but I think overall there's not a dramatic surprise coming here that isn't anticipated. And the banks, I think, have already kind of written it down as well. And because the banks get so much flexibility from the Fed, which is, again, not the right thing to do, in my opinion, but they're allowing them. And that's why the emergency lending window has never been more crowded than it is today.
So, hey, that's one piece of positive news in this discussion. So that's great. It's not going to be widespread. Is the BTFP program is that been more than basically more or less a Band-Aid on the banking issues from 2023? Is the injury still there from last year? Is it ready to reveal itself once this program expires?
I think the banks are in big trouble, Gary. Look, we can listen to all the crap we want from the chair and telling us that they could pass an audit. I would like to see a legitimate audit of a bank. I would like to have an independent auditor going. I think these banks are so dramatically over leveraged once again. And I think they were allowed to do so openly. During COVID, the restrictions of lending out 10-to-1 were lifted. There was no limit for a while. You don't think that these banks that could lend out as much as they want to anybody they wanted, okay, knowing that they would be bailed out by the American taxpayer once again, worried about it. Someday you're going to wake up and there's going to be the big banks are going to be collapsing.